Hello and welcome to the first build along or watch along that I've ever done for the Learn the Web channel. So we're going to be building our first ever website in this example. There's going to be a quick note here at the beginning. This video took a lot longer than I expected, and I've actually split this into two parts. So this is part one and part two is following up on this. We're going to build a very simple first website, and these are the things that I'm going to use in this website. We're going to use a browser, we're going to use Terminal, we're going to use Atom or a text editor of your choice. We're going to set things up on GitHub as well. We're going to use Git. We're going to use Photoshop and its Generate Images tool. Obviously you could use Figma or you could use Sketch or any other kind of tool instead of Photoshop for these kind of things. But I've chose Photoshop for this thing, and I've also chose Generate Images because I think those two things are going to appear inside your career and you need to get used to using them. So for our first build along, we're going to use Photoshop. Remember that I said I set some rules for this challenge, so they're quite simple. I'm keeping it simple. We're not using SCSS or less or any complicated stuff. The website will be built the good old-fashioned way. We're going to use HTML and CSS only. Layout will be achieved by Flexbox. The website will be responsive to a basic level, and we're going to use source set. And then finally, probably the biggest challenge is I'm going to be setting myself a time limit of 30 minutes. I already told you at the very beginning of this that I've failed, and part two will explain why, but here we go. So this is the design that we're going to be building. It's quite simple. The colours are mostly just greys and there's not much to it. But first of all, we're going to start by going to GitHub and we're going to create a new repository. We're going to click the new button, and I'm going to save this to my Learn the Web account so you can get access to it later on. I'm going to put a description in here so you know exactly what this is and you can come back to it later. But for the time being, I'm going to put the description in, and I'm also going to make this video private once I've written this description in here. It's taken me a little while to write this description. So I'm going to make this video private here. Oh. No, I'm not going to make this video private at all. Instead, yeah, I think I'll add this to Craig Burgess and I'll leave it private there for now. So we've created the simple repository. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to pull that into my computer. So I'm going to go to Terminal and go to my Sites folder. And then I've copied that from GitHub and I've cloned it in, and it's going to clone an empty repository. And that's where I'm going to start with this website, and then I'm going to open Atom. I like using the Atom dot symbol to open it on my command line. And now I'm just going to make some files in here as well. I'm going to make my first file, which is going to be just a git ignore file, and I'm going to put ds store things in there. So I've made my index.html file there as well. And now I'm just making my style.css file, but I'm going to call it screen.css. And there we go, those two files are made. So this is the design, this is what it looks like. This is the one that I'm going to build throughout this, and I'm just going to close some of these things that I don't need as well. You might have noticed here that I'm actually commentating over what I did earlier. I'm not actually typing this while I'm doing it, which is a bit weird. And I'm going to set a time limit. It took me a while to work out how to set this time limit, by the way, so just enjoy this for a second. There we go. So 30 minutes is a go from now. I've pulled that in, and we're going to go back to Atom and start writing some code. So I'm going to pull it up in a web browser, and I've got Valet set up on my computer, and at the minute I've got nothing in there. First of all, I start by just typing the HTML stuff in there by using the HTML:5, and I'm going to give this site just a useful title, and it doesn't really matter what you put in there. Then I'm going to link up the style at the top of this by just using the link thing. This is the first thing that I realized at this point, that I wanted to keep it a bit neater. So I started by typing screen.css and I left that in there. Then I changed my mind and changed it to making the folder structure as assets. As I make these folders, I'll explain why I did that. I like to keep my folders neat, and I like only my HTML files to be in the root. By making an assets folder, it means that I can have an images file, an images folder, a JS folder, an anything folder in the future, and it all keeps it quite neat and it keeps everything on the root level. So I've put the CSS inside the CSS folder rather than leaving it in the root, and there we go, it's all working fine. So I've added HTML there. And I'm going to start by just doing a basic reset. It's just a nice simple reset that I use for most projects. More commercial projects, I use something a bit more complicated rather than the padding 0 and the margin 0 one. But for this project and for the simplicity of this site, it's fine. I'm just going to clean that up so it looks proper. And now we're going to take a first look at the design. So the top area there is the logo, and that's using a font off Google Fonts. In fact, the entire thing uses fonts from Google Fonts, but I'm not going to set up the Google Fonts thing yet. I'm just going to start by making the structure. This is something I always do with every single website. I start by making the structure before I move on to anything else. So the logo and the navigation I've put inside a site header. Then I make a div for site logo, and then I'm just going to copy and paste the Minimo text like that, and just wrap a H1 around it. I'm going to use Google Fonts in a little bit to make this all look correct, so I'm not too concerned about what it looks like at the minute. I just want to make the layout there, basically the markup there. Then I'm going to make a site nav div and put some ULs inside it, and the way that I do this here is using something called Emmet, which is a plugin for Atom, and it's built into many of the other text editors. It's a really powerful tool and I love using it. And there we go, I'm just adding it in. And then I expand this, and I've actually made a mistake right there, but I come back to that later on and fix it. So if you haven't spotted the mistake, don't worry, I'll fix it later on. So now I'm just adding all the list items in there from the PSD. There we go. So I've got the first bit of the structure done, and now I'm just going to put a container around everything as well. So that's all inside a container. It won't look any different because I haven't added any CSS yet. So I'm going to style up the container next inside a section called layout. I'm going to put the container in there, put a width of, I'm just going to check the width actually. So the width should be, is it about 1000 pixels or 1200 pixels or something? By the way, this isn't my PSD, so I actually struggled a little bit to work out the width. There it is, 1200 pixels wide. So I put the 1200 pixels wide in, and then margin 0 auto, which will make it go into the middle of the page, and that's that done. So next I'm gonna take the colors, the default colors of the page. Let me just get out of Quick Mask in Photoshop so it works properly. There we go. So I'm gonna grab the color. This color is actually used throughout the entire design, so I'm going to set it at the very top in a universal section. So I'm going to target the body inside this universal section. I'm going to put color, which is the color I've just copy and pasted out of Photoshop, and it changes the color site-wide, and that's fine because all the text is the exact same color. And now I'm going to grab the image. This is where I'm going to use Photoshop's generate tool. So I'm going to start by typing hero-image.jpg in there, and then I'm going to go into the menu and go to File, Save, File, Generate Image Assets, and it automatically starts generating the files. So I'm just opening up Alfred here and just finding the assets folder. So once the generates things is turned on, it creates an assets folder at the exact same place as the PSD. And there it is. So it's generated the hero image for me, which is good. And that's the image. Perfect. I can see here that it's generated it too big because my PSD is at 2 times the size. So I'm just going to put at 2times.jpg in there. And then make a 50% version of it as well, because we'll be using both versions through source set later on in this tutorial. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to go back to the folder and just make sure it's generated the 2 files. Still got 23 minutes left, Greg. You're fine. You're fine. So let's take a look and just see if those images have generated. There they are. So now I've generated those images. Photoshop generate tool is working exactly how I expect, but I'm just going to change the file name a little bit because I want to also make the JPEGs just 80% 80% quality, and that's made the file sizes a little bit smaller. So now I'm going to copy and paste those into my sites folder that I've created, go into assets and image and add them in. And now that means I'll be able to link them up in a little while inside Atom. So now I'm going to create a hero section in here for the top of my first element, and I'm going to put an image inside there from the image that I've generated, and just assets, image, hero image, and then I'm going to put an alt tag in there as well, just my hero image for now. Let's just see if that's worked. Yep, that's worked, perfect. And now I'm just going to put source set on there as well. So this is for double density displays. When a higher resolution image screen is used, it's going to use the bigger image, so none of the images are going to look blurry. You won't tell the difference though from this tutorial, but it's quite a useful skill to use. And then I'm going to just get the size of the image. So it's 1602 pixels by 509. And then I'm just going to add those sizes inside image. So just put width 1062, sorry, and a height of 509. And now I'm just going to add a thing in there that I've just realized that the width of the site is not correct. I've made the width of the site too wide. The images are only 1000 pixels wide, so I need to make the images smaller. And then I'm also going to put max width 100% and height auto on there for the responsive stuff later on. So that means when the site changes size, the images are going to look okay and they're going to rescale proportionally. So now let's look at the bits below it. We're going to look at the width and height of these elements, and we're going to start laying these out in our markup. So the first big post element I'm going to add in here, each element is going to use the post element, even the big one at the top, because all the structure is actually the same. So I'm going to change hero image at this point to post image, because I think that's probably a better name. And I'm going to add the post title in and copy and paste this in. And I'm also going to add the post meta thing, the little photo diary thing above it, which is a category, but that's probably going to be a link. So I'm going to change that right at the very beginning. I'm going to set it up as a link. Even though the link is not a real link, it's a good practice inside your builds, inside your static builds, to make them links, because it means you'll style them up in your CSS as well. So I'm going to add the body in there too. Finish off the title first. There we go. So this is going to be a H2 because we've used the H1 above already. Then I'm going to add the body in below it. So we're going to make another section underneath that called post body. And just copy and paste that in inside a P when I get it right, when the text expander works properly. There we go. And now we're going to add the leave a comment thing in there too. And this would probably just be a link. So we're just going to add this at the bottom of the body and put the leave a comment thing in there. And we're going to style it up shortly. So we've got the links in there and they're blue at the minute. They look rubbish, but that's okay. And we can see lower down that the design pretty much looks the same. So when we copy and paste these in, we're actually not going to lose too much of this. So I'm just going to, at this point, copy this. And then lower down, because they are next to each other, I'm going to start building my grid. I've not written any of my CSS for this yet, but the widths of them are probably about 50%. So I've made the row for that, and I've copy and pasted the post in. Now I'm just going to shorten that content and remove the leave a comment because it's not there. So I'm just going to copy the 3 lines and remove the leave a comment. Shorten that down. Change it for a P tag and add it in. There we go. And for now, I'm just going to change this to more than a music festival, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this element 4 times, just so it's listed all on top of each other. Because there's only 4 of them. They all look identical, and I'm not worrying too much about the content at the minute. I'm making the structure of the website and making sure the markup is correct. So there we go, we've got all the elements in. We've actually got most of the markup in there now. So now we're going to start styling some of this up. So we're going to start with the grid first because we want the elements to start going next to each other. I'm writing a really simple grid here. I've used row, which is something from Bootstrap, and I'm going to use display flex. As soon as I put display flex on something, it displays them next to each other, which is kind of what we want. And then I'm going to add justify content space between, which when we put the widths on the column elements in a minute, it'll all make sense and they'll go next to each other, but leave a space in between. Then I'm going to make the widths to be 46%, and that's not worked for some reason. Refreshed it a few times, still not worked. The structure looks okay. So I've put the calls correctly, that's all alright. I've put display flex and justify content, that's correct, and I've put the width, and that's all correct. So why are they not changing? Let's have a look at the inspect elements. This is a good debug moment here, folks, for you to have a look at whilst I try and work out what's happened. Yeah, the width is working, but it's not applying. That's a strange one. I've just remembered what I've missed. Flexwrap. So now I just need to put Flexwrap on this and wrap the elements, and then as soon as I've added that, they all go how I expect. That's perfect. That's what I wanted. So we're starting to make the layout here already. I'm going to apply all calls, all elements inside row by using the asterisk. I'm going to put a margin bottom of 20 pixels on all elements inside row. There we go. That's added that. That's exactly what I expected to happen. And that's all looking as we'd expect. So we're just going to make some more columns for the header section. So that's for the logo, and this second part is for the navigation. And we're going to call that col 9 with a width. So that is 3/4, so that would be a width of about 75%. But because we're putting a bit of space in it as well, we're going to make it about 70% instead of 75%. And now we're going to wrap this around our header, the bit that I didn't do before. So we're going to put a row element in there, and a col 3, and then next to that, using the magic of emit by typing plus, we're going to put col 9, which is the things we've just done in our CSS. So we've made the shelf there, we've made the responsive grid. Now I'm going to just copy and paste the site logo into there, and then copy and paste the site nav into there. And now let's check it. Perfect. So that's the responsive grid in the header working. And now we're going to start to add some styles to our header to make it look like how we'd expect. So we're going to start with the site logo and the site navigation, and we're going to start with the site navigation. So we're going to do, we're going to target the LI instead. So we're going to display the elements inline block to make them appear next to each other. And then we're also going to target the site nav. Yep, we're going to target the site nav and put text align right, which makes them go to the right, and I've only got 13 minutes left. And then we're going to just look back at the design and work out some of the widths. I'm just checking the widths with the ruler here and seeing how far from the top of the page it is. So on our site header, next we're going to put a margin on it. So we're going to put a margin on, we're going to put padding on it. And we're going to put a padding of 70 pixels on the top and the bottom and 0 on the left and the right. And then I'm just going to indent that so you can see the relative relations to them. Yep, that's looking good. And now we're going to go to Google Fonts and we're going to start adding some of those fonts in there. So I'm just going to find all these fonts that I need to find. It's called Incus Cluster or something like that. And that font is Playfair. We're going to find that Playfair and add that to our Google Fonts as well. And then there's a third font somewhere too. Where's the third font? Is it that one? Playfair, that's the one. Ubuntu. So we're going to find Ubuntu on Google Fonts as well and make sure we add that. So we've got the 3 fonts that we need to add there. And we're going to go to customize and just make sure we've got the correct versions of the font. We need Ubuntu Lite, the Inca Plata or whatever that font's called. We've got that, and we've got the right Playfair display. Yep, that one's correct. We don't want the bold version, we only need the regular version for the logo, which is right. And then have we got the correct versions of Playfair? Is that all light or is it regular? Nope, it's using the regular one, so we've got that correct. Now we're going to embed it. We're going to use the import option rather than the standard way, because we're going to use it in our CSS rather than using it anywhere else. So above the universal, I'm going to paste the link in there like that. And now we're going to start with the font family for the entire website, which is Playfair. So we're going to add that into the body, and we're going to change it so it's font rather than font family, so we can set our font size at the same time using the shorthand font statement. Let's check it. There we go. So that font has changed. 10 minutes left, Craig. Plenty of time still. So that font's worked, and now we're going to change the logo font as well, so we make it look a little bit more like the PSD for the Minimo bit. So we're going to target the site logo and put the font in there like we did before, using the shorthand statement rather than the longhand one. So we guessed at 2M. That looks okay, but it's too fat. That size is a little bit better, but it's still too fat. In the design there, it's much thinner. Yep, it's definitely the regular version, and we need to make it black. So I'm going to change the color to black, #000, and save, and let's have a look at that. And change the font weight as well, because it's too fat at the minute. But that's still not working. It's because we're not being specific enough, I think, inside our CSS. So we're going to change that. I'm just going to check here that the font's correct. Yep, there's no lighter versions, so I think it's the CSS specificity. So I'm going to target the font weight. Nope, still not changed. So instead I'm going to do site logo H1 and target the font weight there, and there we go. That's exactly what we expected to see. But we also need to make it uppercase, so we're going to do text transform uppercase, and that's made it uppercase. And the spacing looks a bit different in the PSD as well. I think the letter spacing needs to be a bit wider. So let's make the letter spacing wider. Take a wild guess. 3 pixels, see if that's correct. Yeah, looks about right. Maybe a bit bigger. That's better. That looks about correct. So now we're targeting the site nav. We're also making those uppercase because that's what the design looks like. But there's more spacing. Again, the letter spacing is bigger, so we're going to change the letter spacing to 2 pixels. That's probably a bit too big there though. 1 pixel. There we go. Now we need to change the margin on these as well. So we're going to put margin left on there. That looks okay for now. We'll probably tweak that width in a little while, but let's just make it just a bit wider. And change the font size because it's obviously a little bit smaller in the PSD too. That's looking a little bit better. Yep. I've just noticed that we've not made those links. This is the error that I made earlier in this video, by the way. So we need to make sure we make these into links so we can style them up properly in the CSS. So I'm going to wrap these with some A links. This is the mistake I made earlier that I didn't notice in the CSS, that I didn't notice in the HTML. So slap of the hands, Craig. There we go. So I'm just in the process here of just wrapping all the links properly and removing the href links from the li. So if you were screaming at me while I wrote this in the HTML earlier, I apologize, but we all make mistakes. We're all human. There we go, so they're all wrapped. And now I need to style up that link as well. So we're going to come in here now, we're going to style up the basic link. And change the text decoration to none to remove the underline. And then we're also going to change the color to the designs. There we go. And I think we'll change the hover too, so it looks a bit nicer. And that's pretty much there. We've only got 5 minutes left now, so I think what I'm going to do now, we've got to a decent point. I'm going to stop the video around here and we're going to come back to this. So we've made fairly decent progress so far. I expected it to take me a lot less time to make this actually, but we're going to return to this in another video shortly because I don't want to make a massive long 2-hour long video. So we've got 5 minutes left and I'm going to return to this video in the very next video where we're going to finish off this website.